welcome. You're listening to the Just Love Them podcast. I'm your host, Shiree Best. Join me on a journey to find understanding and peace with those we love who have left their faith. When I was in the middle of raising teenagers, I had a child who became very cold and quiet. She would come home from school and I'd say, "How was your day?" "Fine." "Do you want to tell me about it?" "No." "Well, here, have a cookie. Let's sit down and talk." "I gotta go, Mom." And that's how it went. She became quieter, more distant, and it was hard to connect with her. I became quite worried. No matter what I did, no matter how hard I tried, she responded in irritation with eye rolls, minimal answers to my questions. She wouldn't engage in any kind of conversation. And I could see that the decisions that she was making were concerning. They were scaring me, and I didn't know what to do. So I called a friend. This is my friend, Kathy. I call her a child whisperer. She was professionally trained to take the hardest foster kids in the state, and she was my friend. So I called her and I asked her, "What do I do with this child? What do I do to connect with this child? I feel like our relationship is getting more and more distant. I'm not okay with it. I want a good relationship with my child. I want her to feel connected to me, and I don't. I feel like I'm losing her. What do I do?" Well, Kathy, in all her wisdom, and after talking and asking questions, told me that she felt like what would be helpful was emotional distancing. Have you ever heard of emotional distancing? According to Alicia Norja, who's a PhD, it's also called psychological distancing. It is increasing the distance between ourselves and someone else, or stepping away emotionally and or physically from a situation. I did a podcast episode a while back with my friend Melanie. It was called Trial in Service. And she talked about she had this set of twins. And it was the same thing. No matter what she did, she couldn't engage them in conversation. She was constantly putting her best foot forward, always trying to engage them, hug them, kiss them, say goodbye, love on them. And they wanted nothing to do with it. They were irritated. They didn't want to hug her back. They didn't want her to hug them. They didn't want to say goodbye. They didn't want to say good morning. They didn't want to talk to her. She talks about how because I had already learned emotional distancing, that I taught her to do that. And so she started doing that with her twins. Emotional distancing is matching the level of giving and receiving that the other person is doing. It's a way of balancing the scales. You have to measure how much are you putting in and how much are they putting in. So what does this do? What does emotional distancing do? It does two things. First of all, it gives you and the other person space. You're trying to preserve the relationship, but what you're doing when you're in an emotionally unbalanced relationship, you're actually pushing the other person away. All the things that you are doing to try and bring them closer to you are actually pushing them away. The other thing is it helps you gain perspective. This allows us to change the way we approach and think about the current situation. It acts like a wide-angle lens. It allows us to zoom out from our narrow, magnified experience so we can see the events and the experiences as part of a more extensive process so that we can gain perspective. Have you seen the movie Soul Surfer? In that movie, Carrie Underwood is the pastor. In a youth group, she shows them a picture, way zoomed in, and the kids guess what it is. They can't guess what it is. When she zooms out, it's a bug's eye. Then she shows them another picture, way zoomed in, and the kids all guess what it is. They can't guess what it is. She zooms it out, it's a walnut. And she was teaching that when we are too close to a situation, we can't see clearly. So sometimes it's a good idea to zoom out and get some perspective. It's perspective for you, and it's also perspective for them. When you put emotional distance in, it creates this balance of giving you both some space and gaining some perspective. Now, emotional distancing definitely does not apply to every relationship, not even close. This is something that you would use in an unbalanced relationship where one person, you, are putting in a lot of effort and the other person isn't. If you're the one putting in a lot of effort and the relationship matters, then this is a place where you might choose to use emotional distancing. Healthy or balanced relationships do not need or even benefit and can even be damaged by using emotional distancing. It's the unhealthy and the unbalanced relationships that can greatly benefit. That seems strange, doesn't it? That this technique can damage a healthy relationship but benefit an unhealthy one? It is strange, but it's true. I want you to think about a loved one you care about who's left the church. How's the balance? Is it good? Do you feel like it's a balanced relationship? Or is it an out of balance relationship that could benefit from getting some balance? If you have a relationship that you're thinking of that's out of balance, like what I've described, then this might be a technique that would help you. Emotional distancing is geared toward healing unhealthy relationships by applying balance, giving space, and the opportunity to gain greater perspective. The goal is to help heal the relationship. So, what are the benefits? Well, first of all, appropriate responses. Many of us have been in situations where our emotions prevent us from seeing the big picture and responding appropriately. For example, we might feel swept away by our emotions, leading us to say or do hurtful things. We might feel paralyzed by our feelings and we're unable to move past our emotions. Or we might make bad decisions because we lose sight of that bigger picture. According to positivepsychology.com, this is what they say, quote, by creating space and reconsidering events more abstractly, we're also able to respond appropriately. For example, our response is not directed toward the exact event in question, but instead takes into account the greater context of that event, unquote. It's zooming out and getting that wide angle lens, better perspective from farther away than being so close into the situation. So another benefit of emotional distancing is that it reduces negative emotions. You might realize that your reaction to a situation was more intense than it needed to be. You can manage your emotional boundaries better, and you can avoid getting overwhelmed by people who are emotionally demanding. A third benefit of emotional distancing is that it gives you a creativity boost. What I mean is it allows you to think outside the box. When you're zoomed out, it allows you to be out of that really intense, in the moment situation. You can zoom out, you can think more creatively, and you can receive inspiration better. A fourth benefit is it allows you to help others because when you're zoomed out, you can see what they need. You've got that space, you've got that perspective. A fourth benefit is that you can actually help others. When you're zoomed out, when you've given them space and you can have a better perspective, sometimes you can see what they need better. And you can use that emotional detachment that you've put in place to actually help them. A fifth benefit is that it helps you prepare for negative situations that inevitably are going to come up. You can choose to remove yourself physically or just emotionally from situations that might trigger a negative response. Have you ever been able to let someone else just rant and rave and you just stay calm? Almost like you're watching them, but you're not involved? I learned to do this, and it is an amazing technique where you imagine that either you are encased in a bubble, and so their negative energy that they're putting out just bounces off. It just bounces off your bubble and goes somewhere else. The other visual that has really helped me is to visualize that there's a clear glass wall that comes right down in between the two of you. And so they're ranting and raving on their side, but you're on the other side of that wall, almost as though you're just watching a movie. you're not emotionally invested. And any arrows that are being thrown at you or that are being shot toward you, they're just bouncing off that glass wall and falling to the ground. They can't get through to you, they can't hit you. And so those two visuals, I've used both of those at different times. They're very similar and both highly effective. Preparing for negative situations in this way and having that tool in place ahead of time can be really, really helpful when the other person is using their negative energy and trying to spew it all over you. It's a way of putting in emotional distance. So how do you know when you need to use emotional distancing? You want to use it when you have an obvious relationship that you can see that's out of balance. And now that I've described to you what that looks like, where you're putting in a lot and they're not putting in, that's a situation where there would be some obvious emotional distancing that could benefit from that. Another part of that is when you are acting out of fear. You love them, but are you acting out of love? Or are you actually thinking that you're acting out of love, but you're actually acting out of fear? Let me give you an example. I had a son who was starting to backpedal from the church. At first, he just didn't want to go to Sunday school. He just wanted to come home after sacrament meeting. This was an adult child. And he just was backpedaling a little bit. And then he had excuses why he didn't want to go to church at all at times. Sometimes he'd come, sometimes he wouldn't. And my fear was going up. I had already seen several of my children at this point step away from the church. And this one, I did not want to lose. I was devastated at the idea of losing yet another child. And this child always seemed to have been very strong. Instead of acting out of love, I thought I was acting out of love at the time, but I was acting out of fear. I remember deciding that I would go get him lunch. And I had this conference talk that I wanted to share with him that I was just sure was going to turn things around and address whatever was bothering him. And I just was going to go get him lunch and we were going to go to the park and I was going to read him this conference talk, which is exactly what I did, which looking back, did nothing to help the relationship. In fact, I was pushing him away. And I was not only not acting out of love. I mean, I love the child. And yes, I desperately wanted to help him, but I wasn't acting out of love. I was acting out of fear. Are they responding with negative emotions? Are they being cold and quiet? Or are they being irritated and eye rolling? Pay attention to how they're responding. Now, I can hear the fear in some of you that if you were to put emotional distance in, that you would lose that child completely. Stay with me. We're going to talk about that. First of all, I want to talk about how emotional distancing works. What does it look like? What it looks like is matching their vibration. Match what they are putting in. Match what they are contributing to the relationship. This gives them a chance to feel comfortable. So with Melanie and her twins in that episode, Trial and Service, that I mentioned that was a while back, Melanie at that point was doing everything she could. She was, good morning, or give them a hug, kiss them, hug them goodbye, say goodbye, love you, do things for them all the time. Those twins were not responding positively. They were so irritated at being hugged and kissed. They did not want to say goodbye to their mother. They did not want to say good morning. They wanted to be left alone. When Melanie put this emotional distancing in place, she quit hugging and kissing them. She quit saying goodbye unless they said it first. She quit saying good morning unless they put it first. She quit doing things for them. She put in emotional distance. That's what it looks like. How did it help? She describes this on the episode if you want to go back and listen to it. But as she did that, it gave her twins space to breathe. And eventually, not immediately, but eventually, they started taking steps back toward her. And she just met them where they were at. And that's exactly what you do. When my husband and I were dating, there was an imbalance in our relationship. My husband was in hot pursuit of me, and I was stepping backward away from him. So he would call me every Sunday, "Hey, can I drive up and go to church with you?" He lived about 30 minutes away. I'd be like, sure. Yeah, that would be fine. So he'd drive up, go to church with me. He was constantly calling me and wanting to hang out with me. And I was just kind of okay, lukewarm with it. One Sunday, he didn't call. I didn't hear from him all day. And so I started to think, well, that's kind of weird. So I called him and I said, "Hey, I didn't hear from you today." And he's like, "Yeah, I just decided to go to my own word." And I thought, okay. I wasn't sure how I felt about that. Well, all the things that he would call me every single day and want to come and want to hang out with me and want to do stuff. And I was pretty nonchalant, like even irritated by this. But as soon as he quit doing those things, I was like, what? What is going on here? And it helped me to realize I actually didn't want to lose him. I actually did want to have a relationship with him. And so I started taking steps forward. And as I took steps forward, he would match it. But he wasn't no longer acting in hot pursuit of me. He might have felt that way, but he wasn't acting that way. I later learned that he had gotten that advice. He didn't know it was called emotional distancing at the time, but he had gotten that advice from my bishop. My bishop had told him to back off and just match what I was giving. And it worked. As soon as he backed off, I realized that I actually did appreciate him and I actually did want a relationship with him. And I started taking steps forward. We were married 4 months later. So, what happened with my daughter? The one I told you about at the beginning of this episode. My teenage girl who was just stepping away farther and farther and farther from me. So, I took my friend Kathy's advice and I started doing emotional distancing. She would come home from school. She wouldn't say hi to me. And I just let it go. If she would look at me and smile, I would look at her and smile. If she said something to me, I'd say something to her. If she asked me a question, I would totally answer. I was acting out of love, but I was letting her decide where the balance was. I was giving her space. I was giving me space. And it did help me to pull back and have some perspective and react better and not react emotionally and negatively. And it helped me to actually help her and gain greater inspiration about what to do. As she had her space, she slowly started to take steps toward me. It took some time. This did not happen immediately. But as she would take a step toward me, I would take a step toward her. She'd take another step toward me, I would match it. Until eventually, over a period of time, our relationship got better. But I needed to give her that space. I guess you could use hot pursuit. I was in hot pursuit of my relationship with my teenager, and she was backing away. I was actually pushing her away. But as soon as I backed off without ever consciously knowing it or ever saying a word to her, something inside of her switched. She was able to have her space and then in her own time and in her own way, start taking steps toward me that I could match. And it worked. And today, that daughter and I have a beautiful relationship. It's possible. Through emotional distancing, you can gain and give space, physical and emotional space, and gain better perspective. This can lead to better balance in the relationship. About a month ago, we had a 1 in 100 year storm where I live. We had a massive hailstorm. And this hail came around dinner time and the skies got so dark, I thought it was night. And then the hail started and they were big pieces of hail and they pounded down so fast and so hard. And all of my beautiful flowers that I had been cultivating all summer, fertilizing and babying and loving on and watering, all my beautiful flowers in half an hour were completely decimated. All the flowers were gone off the plants. Most of the leaves were gone. That hailstorm completely ruined my flowers. I was so sad. And I left the plants there. I thought, well, I could just dig everything up and put it in the garbage, be done for the summer. But I didn't get around to it. And a few weeks went by. And one day I noticed that the leaves had grown back on my flowers. And I have these beautiful window boxes that are outside my windows. And so that I can, without even having to go outside, enjoy all these beautiful flowers on the other side of the glass. And I noticed that the leaves had grown back on the stems that were bare after the hailstorm. And then a few days later, I noticed that there were little buds on the plant. And a few days later, the buds began to open. And the flowers came back even more beautiful than they were before the hailstorm. So many flowers, like breathtaking amount of flowers and leaves. I wish I could show you a picture right now. I'm going to post one on the Facebook page so you can go there and see the flowers. I wish I had a before and after picture, but the after picture of these flowers in these window boxes is stunning. There's so many flowers, you almost can't see the leaves. And as I thought about this, I was thinking about emotional distancing and the flowers. Now, there might not seem to be a correlation, but hang with me because there is. And this is the answer to what I said I would address earlier. When you are afraid, how is emotional distancing going to help my relationship? Isn't it just going to damage it further? This is the answer to that question, that fear. Just like that hailstorm damaged, seemingly, my plants, my flowers, they came back stronger. They came back more beautiful. I could have done the same thing if I had just cut them all off and let them grow back. But when you put emotional distancing in some ways you are creating a storm. You're taking a step back. You are kind of cutting off some of the plants. But what I have seen and what others have seen and what my friend Kathy, the child whisperer who takes the hardest kids, foster kids in the state, has seen is that emotional distancing works. It's counterintuitive. It seems like you're damaging the plant. It seems like you're damaging the relationship with your loved one. But what it actually is doing is making some cutbacks and allowing the relationship to come back stronger. It makes no sense that stripping the leaves and the flowers off my plant would lead to bigger, beautiful flowers in the long run. And I can say the same for some of the damaged relationships with my children. There is hope. The goal is to heal the relationship, to bring that person close to you, to be more connected. That's your desire. And it sounds so counterintuitive, but in an unhealthy relationship where you are acting out of fear and they are acting out of resentment, frustration, or annoyance, emotional distancing brings your relationship back to a healthy place where you have a more clear perspective. You respond in healthy ways. It actually helps the person you care about. As always, keep God as your counselor. Talk over your relationships with Him. Tell Him your struggles and your ideas about what to do. For example, you may ask Him if emotional distancing is a healthy fit for your situation. Don't take my word for it. Ask God. Then listen for ideas that come to you. God is there for you. He wants to help you. He's waiting to help you. He's putting resources and people and ideas in your way to help you and to help those that you love. This podcast is one of those resources. One of my listeners said this: I have been listening to your previous podcasts and have found great insight into the things that I can use to put me in a better place as I wait for God to let me know when and how to mend relationships. I wanted to tell you thank you for first listening to God and moving forward to do as He suggested you do while fulfilling your purpose in this season. Thank you for being open and honest so that myself and others can find help and direction while we wait for God to speak to us. Thank you for giving me a place to listen and understand with my own ears and heart. You're doing a grand work. You're helping all of us understand on a deeper level that after all we can do, they are God's children first. And He has it under control. Thank you for sending me that text. Another resource is your opportunity to talk to someone one-on-one who has been there, has experienced 6 children leaving the church in various ways, and who has been uniquely trained and qualified to help you. If you feel prompted to talk about it and get some personalized help tailored just for you, sign up for a free mini session. This is a 30-minute session, though I often go longer. In this session, you can share your biggest struggles and your questions. We'll talk about it, and I'll help you. My goal is to be an instrument in God's hands and to help the people that He wants me to help. The link for that will be in the show notes if that feels like a right fit for you. Know that God is aware of you. He loves you, and He will help you when you reach out and ask Him, and then look and listen for His answers. I pray God will bless you. Join me again next time for another episode of Just Love Them.